This is the conversation nobody wants to have. Not because the ideas are too complex, because the stakes are too personal, because the moment you name what's actually happening inside the relationships that matter most to you, the ones built on decades of genuine care, genuine sacrifice, genuine love, you risk something that feels more dangerous than any argument. The possibility that the people you have trusted completely are also, in ways they may not recognize and you may not have permitted yourself to see, working to keep you exactly where they need you to be. Nietzsche wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, published in 1886, that love, in its most common human form, is not the selfless force that moral tradition has always claimed it to be. It is, he argued, among the most powerful expressions of the will to possess, not the will to harm, not the will to destroy, the will to have, completely, securely, without the threat of loss. And the difference between possession and manipulation, when the possession is organized around someone you genuinely love, is a distinction that most people never examine closely enough to locate. That examination is what this video is. If you have ever felt inside a relationship defined by love, a pressure you couldn't fully name, give this video a like right now, because what follows is going to make visible something that has been operating in your closest relationships for longer than you know. 1. Love organized around fear of loss becomes control. John Bowlby's attachment theory, developed through decades of clinical research and observation at the Tavistock Institute in London, established one of the most foundational insights in developmental psychology. The quality of a person's earliest attachment experiences shapes, with remarkable persistence, how they experience closeness throughout their entire life. Mary Ainsworth's subsequent research identified what she called anxious attachment, the pattern that forms when early caregiving is inconsistent enough that the child learns to experience the proximity of loved ones as something that must be actively managed rather than simply trusted. The anxiously attached person grows up with a specific interior equation. Closeness equals safety, and anything that threatens closeness threatens survival itself. What this produces in adult relationships is not cruelty. It is a specific, continuous, largely unconscious project, the management of the other person's behavior in ways that reduce the threat of distance, the monitoring of your moods for early warning signs of withdrawal, the interpretation of your independence as emotional movement away from them, the mobilization of guilt, need, or injury at the precise moments when you show signs of becoming more self-sufficient. Not because they want to harm you, but because your self-sufficiency registers in their nervous system as the beginning of abandonment. Nietzsche in Aurora described this with a precision that clinical psychology would spend decades catching up to. The love that cannot tolerate the freedom of its object is not love in its highest form. It is love that has been contaminated by the lover's own fear, transformed from something given freely into something that extracts continuously the reassurance that the fear requires. The manipulation here is real, and it coexists without contradiction with love that is also real. Both are true simultaneously, and the only thing more painful than recognizing one is recognizing that recognizing it does not dissolve the other. 2. Sacrifice as the most effective form of debt creation. Erich Fromm, in The Art of Loving, published in 1956, drew a distinction that most people encounter too late and too rarely. The difference between loving and being loved, between giving because the giving is an expression of genuine abundance and giving in ways that create an implicit ledger, one that the giver may not consciously maintain, but that the recipient is made to feel in ways that accumulate over time into something indistinguishable from obligation. The people who love you most are often the people who have sacrificed most for you. And sacrifice, even when it is entirely genuine, changes the relational mathematics in ways that neither party fully acknowledges. They gave up something real. They gave it without explicit conditions, but the giving created a gravitational field, an implicit understanding about what you owe, about what your choices mean in relation to what they gave, about what it says about you as a person if you pursue a life that makes their sacrifice feel, in retrospect, like something they did for someone who didn't fully value it. This is not cynicism about sacrifice. It is precision about how sacrifice functions inside human relationships, regardless of how generously it was offered. Nietzsche, in On the Genealogy of Morality, traced the psychology of debt with an unflinching specificity that made many of his readers deeply uncomfortable, precisely because he refused to exempt love from the analysis. He observed that the most durable debts are not the ones that are named and quantified. They are the ones that exist in the atmosphere of a relationship, felt but unspoken, impossible to repay because their terms were never explicit, impossible to dispute because disputing them requires questioning the love that generated them. The manipulation embedded in this structure is not calculated. The person who sacrificed for you did not sacrifice in order to control you. But the control that follows from the sacrifice is real regardless of the intention. And you have felt it. In the moments when your choices were weighted not only by what you wanted, but by what your choices would mean to someone whose entire investment in you makes your direction feel like a verdict on the value of everything they gave. 3. The neuroscience of love and the chemistry of compliance. Carsten de Dreux and colleagues at the University of Utrecht conducted a series of studies on oxytocin, the neurochemical most consistently associated with bonding, trust, and the experience of closeness, that produced findings significantly more complicated than the popular account of oxytocin as simply the love hormone. What their research found was that oxytocin does not produce indiscriminate warmth. It produces selective bonding, a powerful increase in care and trust toward members of the in-group, accompanied by a corresponding increase in suspicion and defensiveness toward those outside it. Love, at the neurochemical level, is also a boundary-drawing mechanism. It creates the group and then protects the group from everything outside it. What this means inside the closest relationships of your life is precise and rarely discussed. The people who love you most are also, neurochemically, the people most invested in maintaining the configuration of the group that contains you. Your independence, your growth, your movement toward a life that pulls you outside the boundaries of the relational unit. All of this triggers, at a level below conscious intention, the same protective mechanisms that the bonding was designed to activate. They are not trying to keep you small. They are trying to keep you close. But at the level of behavior, the effect is often identical. And understanding that the mechanism is neurological rather than malicious does not make it less real in its impact on your choices, your direction, and your capacity to develop beyond the shape the relationship has assigned to you. Nietzsche, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, described love's possessive dimension not as a flaw in love, but as its shadow, the inevitable companion of genuine attachment. Zarathustra loves deeply and repeatedly, the love of those around him becomes a weight, not because they are bad people, but because love, at a certain intensity, cannot help but want to hold what it values. The holding is the problem, not the love. Think about a relationship in your life where the love has functioned as much as a gravity as a gift, where being loved has also meant being kept. Comment below. Love should make me more, not less. Just that. Because the person who needs that sentence has already been waiting for permission to say it. 4. Enmeshment. When love erases the boundary between self and other. Salvador Minuchin, one of the founders of structural family therapy, introduced the concept of enmeshment to describe a specific relational pattern in which the boundaries between individuals within a close system become so permeable that separate identity becomes difficult to maintain. Enmeshed relationships are not characterized by coldness or distance. They are characterized by their opposite: an intensity of involvement, a depth of mutual investment, a degree of emotional interconnection that makes individual differentiation feel like disloyalty. In an enmeshed relationship, your emotions are experienced as their emotions. Your choices carry implications for their sense of self. Your success or failure is inseparable from their experience of themselves as people, which means that the project of becoming more fully yourself, more differentiated, more individual, more capable of operating independently of the relational system, is not experienced by the enmeshed person as your growth. It is experienced as your departure. And departures inside an enmeshed system are not simply disappointing. They are destabilizing. They require the other person to locate a sense of self that has been distributed across the relationship, to find, suddenly, where they end and you begin, after a long period in which that boundary was dissolved by mutual agreement into something that felt, for a long time, like the deepest possible form of love. Nietzsche, in Beyond Good and Evil, wrote about what he called the dissolution of the individual into the relationship as one of the primary mechanisms through which love becomes a vehicle for control rather than a space for genuine encounter. The person who has no self outside of the relationship cannot afford your individuation, because your individuation is their dissolution, and they will resist it, through guilt, through need, through the quiet but persistent suggestion that who you are becoming is a betrayal of who they raised, married, befriended, or loved. Not because they want to harm you, but because your freedom is, for them, genuinely frightening. This channel exists outside the algorithm. No sponsorships, no brand deals. Just research, writing, and the belief that ideas sharp enough to change how you see yourself are worth protecting. If this is giving you language for something you have carried for years without being able to examine it directly, consider supporting this work through the link in the description. Every contribution keeps this independent, and that independence is what makes this kind of conversation possible. 5. What Nietzsche says the highest form of love actually requires. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche constructed what remains one of philosophy's most demanding accounts of what genuine love between people actually demands. Not comfort, not possession, not the management of the other person's direction to ensure they remain within reach. What he called the gift-giving virtue, the highest form of love in his framework, is love that gives without requiring the recipient to remain shaped by the gift. Love that genuinely wants the other person to become more than the relationship can contain. This is an almost unbearably high standard, because it requires the lover to tolerate, without collapsing, the possibility that the person they love will grow into someone who needs them differently, or less, than they need to be needed. It requires a security that does not depend on the other person's proximity, compliance, or continued organization around the relationship as its primary reference point. Erich Fromm made the same demand in different language. To love is to will the freedom of the beloved, not the freedom that is compatible with your needs, the freedom that belongs to them, including the freedom to become something you didn't anticipate, to move in directions you wouldn't have chosen, to exceed the version of themselves that you fell in love with. Most love does not reach this standard, not because the people loving you are deficient, but because this standard requires a degree of self-possession, a security in one's own identity that does not depend on the other person's configuration, that very few people have developed to the degree the standard requires. Epictetus, in the Enchiridion, offered the frame that makes this navigable rather than simply painful. What belongs to you is your response, your direction, your interior. What belongs to others, including the people who love you, is their response to your becoming. You cannot manage both. And the attempt to manage both, which is what most people do inside relationships where love and manipulation coexist, produces the specific exhaustion of living a life that is partly yours and partly assembled from what the people who love you needed you to be, now the part that requires the most from you. Because this conversation has a direction that it would be dishonest to leave unexamined, you have been, in all likelihood, on both sides of this. You have been loved in ways that contained you, and you have loved in ways that contained others. Not out of malice, not out of calculation, but out of the same fear that drives every version of this pattern. The fear that if the person you love becomes fully free, they might become free from you. That fear is not shameful. It is human. It is the shadow that love casts when it is organized around need rather than abundance. When what you are giving is coming from a place of scarcity rather than genuine surplus. When the love is doing double duty as both connection and security system. Nietzsche's most honest philosophical contribution on this subject is not the diagnosis. It is the standard he set for what love could be instead. Love that makes the other person more capable of living without you, that delights in their freedom rather than managing it, that is secure enough in itself to release rather than hold. That standard is worth holding, even when it is not being met, even when the love around you is doing what love so often does, giving genuinely and controlling simultaneously, caring deeply and requiring compliance as the price of the care. You're allowed to love the people who have loved you imperfectly. You're allowed to understand the mechanism without condemning the person. And you are allowed to take what was given to you, the love, the sacrifice, the years of genuine investment in who you are, and use it to become someone who exceeds what the relationship imagined for you. That is not ingratitude. That is the only honest way to honor what you are given. 2 questions for the comments. First, what is the specific form this has taken in your most important relationship? The particular way that love and control have occupied the same space. Second, what would you do differently if you trusted that becoming more fully yourself was not a betrayal of the people who love you, but the only real gift you can give them in return? Leave it below. The specific answers are the ones that reach the people who need them. And if this kind of examination, the honest, patient, unflinching look at what love actually does inside the most important relationships of your life, is work you want to continue, subscribe, because the next video takes this into territory that connects directly to what this one opened. The people who love you are not your enemies, but they are not always your freedom either. Learning to hold both of those things at once, without collapsing into either, might be the most important work of your life.